Russia's attacks on Ukraine have been going on for more than a year. This spring, conflicts between the two countries are expected to intensify. While both countries were explaining their preparations, hundreds of kilometers of defense line of Russia in the south of Ukraine was viewed from the satellite. Experts are of the opinion that this line of anti-tank trenches, minesweepers and trenches will take the conflict in Ukraine to a new dimension. Ukraine has announced that it has almost completed its preparations for a counterattack on Russia in the spring. This attack, which will probably be launched in the south of the country, will have a very important place in this war. In addition, satellite images shared by the U.S. satellite company Maxar revealed the dimensions of the Russian defense is being built in parts of southern Ukraine. Satellite photographs showed layers of anti-tank ditches, obstacles, minefields, and trenches. However, the defensive line of Russian troops continues for hundreds of kilometers on the rugged southern front, where Ukrainian forces are expected to intensify their counterattack in the coming weeks. Applied footage also showed wide trenches and thousands of defensive positions east of the town of Poloi in the Zaporizhia region. Ukraine is making progress in key areas as Russia goes on the defensive on the southern front line. Let's take a closer look at the developments on the southern front. Geographical data and reports released by Russian military bloggers show that Ukrainian forces are positioned on the east bank of the river. The U.S. Institute for War Studies said in a statement, but the scale and objectives of these first recorded Ukrainian successes were unclear. According to the U.S.-based think tank, Russian military forces withdrew from the regional capital, also called Kherson, and from the west bank of the Dnipro during a Ukrainian offensive last year. Natalia Humeniuk, spokesperson for Ukraine's Southern Command, neither confirmed nor denied the progress report on the river bank, told Ukrainian television. Natalia Humeniuk referred to the reported river crossing. Humeniuk stated that in response to such information, the Russians significantly intensified their attacks on the opposite shore. The official reported that civilians were injured and about 30 buildings were destroyed, including a school. In addition, the spokesperson called for informational silence to ensure operational safety. Humeniuk said, for example, "I want everyone to understand that it is a very difficult task to overcome an obstacle like the Dnipro, when the front line is moving along such a wide and powerful river. For months, Dnipro has marked the line of contact in the Kherson region, where it's regularly bombarded by Russian forces stationed on the other side of the river." Ukrainian forces established a foothold near the town of Analysts, along the Dnipro River Delta from Kherson. The War Research Institute announced that Kiev troops were approaching the nearby village of Dapchi. The think tank cited data from Russian military bloggers for this assessment. The head of the Kherson district established by the Kremlin denied that Ukrainian forces had established a foothold on the east bank of the river. Analysts believe that if Ukraine continues its counteroffensive, it is to cross the land corridor that Russia managed to seize at the beginning of the war between its territory and the Crimean peninsula. Such an operation would require crossing the Dnipro River. Ukrainian forces have been operating on the east bank of the river for weeks, according to military bloggers cited by the ICW. Kiev forces established stable supply lines west of the Antonivsky Bridge. According to the Russian forces control an area of 1.5 kilometers behind. The bridges claimed that the rest of the bridge was under the control of Ukrainian forces. Antonivsky Bridge plays a key role in the Kherson region. There have been significant developments on this bridge since last year when Ukraine began its counterattack in the south. It began by targeting the bridge as part of a wider effort to isolate Russian forces west of the Dnipro River. When Western long-range weapons systems arrived en masse, Ukraine hit Russian ammunition depots and command and control centers behind the front lines, weakening Russia's dominance in the region. Antonivsky Bridge is the main crossing over the Dnipro River in the Kherson region. For example, last May, Ukrainian troops struck the strategic Antonivsky Bridge, which Moscow needed to supply its forces occupying the south of the country. Ukrainian forces had used US-supplied HIMARS multiple rocket launchers to hit the bridge after the HIMARS attack. The deck of the bridge was pierced with holes preventing the passage of vehicles. In November, the Antonivsky Bridge was blown up before dawn, after most of the Russian forces had withdrawn and just before the Ukrainian forces entered the city. The days are very active on the southern front line of Ukraine. Ukrainians who are trying to advance to Crimea by crossing the Dnipro River are also taking precautions in attacks against Crimea. The Ukrainian armed forces deployed a long-range missile system Grom 2 in Zaporizhia for attacks on Crimea. The Grom 2 missile system has a range of up to 300 kilometers, which allows the Ukrainian army to attack the territory of Crimea. Vladimir Rogov, head of the Zaporizhia movement We Are With Russia, announced that the Grom 2 long-range operational tactical missile system was transferred by Ukrainian troops to the city of Zaporizhia under the control of Kiev. RIA Novosti reported that, according to Rogov, this missile system could be used for attacks in Crimea. Rogov argues that these actions confirm the need to push the Ukrainian troops as far as possible from the Zaporizhia region, and the line of contact should be moved deeper into Ukraine. Earlier, Vladimir Rogov also reported that Ukrainian troops accumulated military equipment in metallurgical factories and granaries in the Oracle and Porkovsky districts of the Zaporizhia region under the control of Ukrainian forces. In another development, Russia's secret plans for the Baltic states came to light. According to an investigation, the Kremlin has drawn up a series of plans outlining how it could exert its influence in the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in the coming years. Leaked documents from Russian President Vladimir Putin's administration in Moscow were seized by Swedish news sources prior to Putin's full-blown invasion of Ukraine. The Baltic states had warned for years of a war Russia could launch. Kremlin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov called Poland and 3 EU member states representatives of extremism in Europe in January. The strategies were created by the Directorate for Cross-Border Cooperation of the Presidential Administration of Russia. This agency had previously prepared another document revealing that the Kremlin plans to incorporate Belarus into a union state with Russia by 2030. The documents state that associations and organizations that can covertly advance pro-Russian narratives and spread Russian culture should be created. Propaganda should claim discrimination against Russian speakers, and Russian-speaking students should be invited to Russia. Meanwhile, the demolition or relocation of Soviet-era World War II monuments must be prevented, according to Swedish news sources. About 300,000 ethnic Russians live in Estonia. They make up about 24% of the population. About 471,000 ethnic Russians live in Latvia, about 25% of its population. And Lithuania is home to about 140,000, representing 5% of its population. According to a joint investigation by news sources, the key issue for the Kremlin is to reduce the presence of the NATO military alliance in the former Soviet countries, while at the same time strengthening Russian influence and culture. A strategy paper points to the risk that Russia's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania will be disconnected from Russia's electricity grid. The document suggests that the Baltic states plan to use their dependence on the electricity grid as a lever. The Baltic states are part of an electrical grid controlled by Moscow. However, countries are preparing to synchronize their systems with continental Europe at the beginning of 2026. A Lithuanian document states that the increased NATO military presence in the region will create conditions under which Russia will be forced to accept the potential damage it can do to its national security. The document states that the number and scope of NATO's operational and combat training activities in the country should be reduced while preventing Lithuania from acquiring NATO-linked air defense. In summary, the Kherson and Dnipro rivers will always be in the foreground in the Ukrainian war. A success here will play a role in bringing the Kiev leader to his dream of Crimea. We will have to wait and see how Russia will respond to the Ukrainian counterattack. While everyone is focused on Bakhmut, Many missed how Ukrainians just won the biggest tank battle in this war. After the fights around Volodar once again became positional, Ukrainian commanders could finally review the results of the 3-week-long battle and share it in an exclusive interview. What strategies and tactics they used to stop more than 200 Russian tanks and armored vehicles. The largest assault on Volodar throughout the war began on the night of the 24th January. Russians concentrated their artillery fire on key Ukrainian strongpoints, opened several axes of advance, and successfully pushed the Ukrainians from the hamlets around the town. The first days were the hardest for Ukrainians because it took around 2 days to relocate enough reserves. But once the reserves arrived, Russians started losing ground. Unable to accept the loss, Russian commanders decided to raise the stakes for weeks ago. They opened more lines of attack, engaged main battle tanks, and started using the most valuable military assets such as thermobaric artillery systems. This is where it became impossible for Ukrainians to hold the fence by just using brute force, and they had to become more creative. The first thing Ukrainians did was to increase their reconnaissance in the region. The intense use of drones continuously gave a lot of insights into where Russians accumulate their forces and deploy reconnaissance groups. Ukrainians did not assume that Russians would use the same roads all the time and analyzed which areas Russian reconnaissance groups were exploring and in proximity to which roads Russians were deploying their armor. After that, they could predict with a high degree of accuracy the place of the next attack. The best way to deflect a heavy attack is to prepare ambushes. So the next thing Ukrainians did was to send a team of miners to mine the area. But interestingly, they did not mine the roads. They only mined the fields. This way Russians had to use columns and they were effectively funneled into the prepared kill zone. Once the setting was ready, Ukrainians assumed their positions and waited for the attack, which did not take long to happen. A Ukrainian commander, Barak, recalled that the first Russian column that got ambushed consisted of about 15 tanks and armored vehicles. He said that everyone was just quietly waiting until the column reached a predetermined checkpoint, and once the mark was crossed, they received the order to battle. The first thing that usually happens is a small Ukrainian infantry unit equipped with anti-tank missiles take out vehicles in front and the rear of the column. This unit is usually located the closest to the ambush somewhere in the tree belts. After the first vehicles are destroyed or damaged, the column becomes essentially blocked. Some people start panicking and try to get around them through the field, exactly where Ukrainians laid their mines at that point. Ukrainian artillery opens fire at the predetermined coordinates, blowing up more armor and killing soldiers who clamber out of disabled machines. During some fights, Russians managed to get very close to the coal mines. Here, Ukrainians had to resort to even tougher measures and ambushed Russian tanks with their own tanks. They hit in the tree lines in multiple places around the kill zone and just fired at them from around a 3-kilometer distance. Sometimes they even used timers or M777 howitzers to make sure that Russian tanks were hit and disabled immediately. A Ukrainian commander of a tank unit, Rebenek, said that during the culmination of the Battle of Alata, he was doing up to 4 such missions per day on his T-62. He said that in the last major engagement he received an order right before the dawn to prepare an ambush for a column of 16 Russian tanks and armored vehicles. This time they did something different. He said that they assumed positions around 5 kilometers away from the kill zone to be out of range of return fire and shot in coordination with a drone pilot who called in coordinates on a radio for targets they could not see directly. As a result, by the end of this tank battle, the Ukrainian military announced that almost the entire Russian 155th Naval Infantry Brigade was destroyed, and Russia had lost 130 units of equipment, including 36 tanks. The freshest reports tell that Russians lost so much armor during this assaults that they were forced to change their tactic recently, and right now they are only capable of attacking with infantry. All authoritarian leaders have a great fear assassination. It is known that Putin has been in a great panic about it lately. Putin is so afraid that he is taking many strange decisions. The Russian press is now saying that Putin is behaving like a paranoid. So how does Putin's fear affect the course of the war? We answer these questions and anchor daily news. First of all, let's discuss the reasons for Putin's fear. As we know, Russia does not have a democratic system. Therefore, it is very difficult to change the power in Russia. Putin is exerting a huge pressure against his opponents. According to the reports of many independent organizations, Putin also interferes in elections. This is causing Putin's opponents to become more radicalized. Many people in Russia think that the power will not change until Putin dies. But there are those who do not think so. Alexei Navalny, one of Russia's most prominent opposition leaders, aimed to use democratic methods to defeat Putin. The Russian people gave Navalny great support. This frightened Putin, but after a very short time, Navalny was poisoned. The Russian people were outraged after Navalny's poisoning. This was a turning point for Russia. After that, Putin decided to increase the number of bodyguards. Reports of Putin's assassination started to increase. Putin became very scared, especially after the invasion of Ukraine. It is known that Putin's fear increased even more. Putin started to do very interesting things because of his fear of assassination. First of all, Putin started to change his programs very frequently. His press conferences were postponed many times. Putin has also completely stopped mingling with the public. He decided not to go outside the Kremlin palace. He holds all his meetings in his palace. Putin has also increased the number of stunt doubles. It is estimated that Putin now has more than 40 doubles. These people participate in many programs instead of Putin. In fact, Putin is not the only politician who uses stunt doubles, but the number of Putin's doubles is extraordinarily high. Putin also uses these doubles on his travels. Putin has a very long convoy of vehicles when he travels by road in these convoys. Putin's doubles also get into different cars. In this way, it cannot be understood which vehicle Putin is in. Last September, as Putin's convoy was heading towards the Kremlin palace, there was an explosion. There was an explosion in the right front tire of Putin's car. The driver was killed in the explosion, but the person in the car at the time was Putin's stunt double. In this way, Putin managed to survive this incident, but this explosion caused Putin's fears to grow even more. The news, based on the claims of a secret confessor in the Kremlin, contains many allegations on the subject. According to the allegations, Putin has trouble sleeping because of this fear. Putin has a weekly meeting with his intelligence chief and receives information about his own bodyguards. Security protocols in the Kremlin palace have also changed. Everyone entering the palace is frisked. Ministers and even Russian commanders are subjected to a search when entering the palace. Commanders leave their weapons with security to enter the palace because Putin does not trust anyone. Russian officials who have witnessed Putin's fear are now fed up with these security protocols. Russian officials think Putin is paranoid after Putin's latest decision. The claims that he is paranoid have increased even more. Until now, Putin has been making all his visits by private airplane. However, according to aviation rules, these flights must be reported to the Russian Air Force. This information is shared to regulate international air traffic, and this situation scared Putin. Putin decided to try an interesting method to make secret trips. A huge train in Russia was covered with steel armor. Putin now makes all his visits using this armored train. Miss Susan, Ukraine's former education minister, made a statement about this. She said that Putin's travel arrangements give an idea about his mentality. Susan said, "I mean, his modus operandi is a little bit different, and he is certainly traveling in a very protective train, very careful about going out in public. It certainly doesn't mean that he feels safe." The issue has also become a hot topic in Russia. Journalist Ilya Destvinsky said that Putin had largely stopped using the presidential plane since the start of the war. It surprises everyone that Putin, who presents himself all over the world as a very brave and fearless leader, is so afraid. The coverage of this news in the Russian press is also very damaging for Putin's reputation. Putin always presents himself as a brave leader in Russia. Putin, who attaches great importance to propaganda, is very angry about the news that he is afraid. It is known that Putin is trying to prevent news on the subject, but Putin can no longer control social media. Russian citizens are fearless against Putin and continue to share real news, especially because of the news shared on Telegram channels. All of Putin's secrets are being exposed. Putin is going through the most difficult days of his political career. His reputation is diminishing day by day because of fear of assassination. Putin has to stay in office in order to be protected by the state. It is thought that if Putin resigns, he will be prosecuted and imprisoned. Putin wants to stay in power to ensure his own security, and he will do anything to do so. However, support for Putin in Russia is decreasing day by day. According to polls in Russia, the percentage of people who support Putin has fallen even below 30%. The Russian people are in great anger against Putin. This situation is making Putin desperate. Putin is having psychological crisis because of this great helplessness and fear. We have already mentioned that Putin is having trouble sleeping and is paranoid. Expert doctors emphasize that this could affect the course of the war. So how this happen as a result of prolonged sleep problems, nightmares and high levels of fear. Putin may make more impulsive decisions. This health problems can also affect Putin's memory. Many people experience memory problems as a result of prolonged sleep problems. They have difficulty remembering decisions they made a few days ago and often experience déjà vu. It is a big problem for Russia that Putin, who has to make critical decisions every day, has this problem. On the other hand, it has been known for a long time that Putin had health problems. Doctors were saying that Putin needed rest and treatment. However, Putin's current problems may trigger other diseases, especially diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's progress more during these processes. It was known that Putin was struggling with Parkinson's disease and was constantly moving his hands uncontrollably. Doctors think that Putin's disease is progressing more and more every day. Putin is preparing his own end because of his fear. What do you think about Putin's fears? How do you think Putin's paranoia is affecting the course of the war? What do you think about Putin's increased security measures? What do you think about Putin's use of armored trains? Do you think Putin will be assassinated?